is billed as the next growth frontier, even as the government prioritizes the industrialization agenda. How is the country moving towards realizing 25% of GDP to be driven by manufacturing by 2030? Well, we are now joined by Phyllis Wakiaga, the CEO of the Kenya Association of Manufacturers, to delve deeper into this. Thank you so much, Phyllis, for making time for us.
You're welcome, Abby.
Well, first off, is manufacturers part of the economy when it comes to the SMEs. And looking at the state of economy, right now, recently the president was putting government heads to task, saying that why are Kenyans broke? The same applies to the SMEs who are in the business of generating products that are being used, but some are not being paid effectively as it should be. From where you sit, how would you assess where we are headed as a country when it comes to the manufacturing industry?
Thanks, Abby, for that question. I think the manufacturing sector has continuously been a priority for any country that wants to develop itself. And we've seen countries that have industrialized. A lot of them have done it on the backbone of the manufacturing sector. Kenya is not left behind because manufacturing has been a priority under Vision 2030. It's one of the priority sectors under the economic pillar. And further to that, the Big Four agenda has prioritized manufacturing as a sector that has the ability to transform the economy. So the manufacturing sector is pitted to contribute to about 15% by 2020, hopefully 25% by the year 2030.
Are we realistic?
The reason first we're ambitious is because of why the manufacturing sector is a beneficial sector. It's a sector that creates a lot of employment and has the ability to have a big multiplier effect, because economists look at multiplier effects. The multiplier effect of the manufacturing sector is for every one job created by manufacturing, 5 jobs can be created within the value chain. It also is a big contributor to tax revenue. Today, even as the sector contributes 7.5% to the GDP, it contributes 20% to tax revenues. If you compare that to agriculture, which contributes 34% to the GDP and contributes 3% in terms of revenue, it tells you why that sector is critical. And then the sector is also able to mobilize a lot of capital, investment, innovation into an economy. And the ability also for the forward and backward linkages, especially to agriculture, which is a backbone of this economy. So that is why it is a priority sector. Is it realistic, as you asked, for us to get to those ambitious numbers? I think it's realistic if we have the right policy environment, if we prioritize the sector and create a conducive environment for it to grow. Countries have been able to double their manufacturing contribution over years. So it's something that Kenya can do.
All right. Yes. And Phyllis, thanks for laying the foundation for us for this discussion. But let's take this discussion forward. When you look at the manufacturers in the country right now, majority are still facing very critical challenges such as affordability in terms of power and, of course, reliability of power. This plays a critical point, and it affects how businesses are run. From your interactions with the players in your organization, which is CAM, which has is like the umbrella body for all manufacturers in the country, what are the key issues that are coming up, and how severe are they denting their operations?
You're right that there are a lot of competitiveness issues that arise within the sector. One of the big agendas we've been driving is the need to make the manufacturing or the local manufacturing scene more competitive. Basically ensure that we reduce the cost of business. We did look at the entire value chain in manufacturing, and we identified that we're at about 12.3% cost disadvantage with comparator nations. So we looked at it from 3 aspects. First of all, our inbound competitiveness. This is the cost of bringing your raw material into the country. So whether it's the import declaration fees, the railway development levies, the issues of port and logistics, and just ensuring that your goods get to the factory. So at that level, we're at about a 6% cost disadvantage because of those different aspects. Then if you come now to your in-factory cost, which is part of what you mentioned, the things like your cost of power or fuel, the labor productivity, the cost of labor, the water and other costs you will incur at the factory level contribute also to a percentage of the 12%. Then we have our outbound costs, which is our supply chain and logistics costs, the costs incurred when you move your goods around the county, so the county fees and charges and the challenges we've experienced moving goods around the country, and delayed payments, because once you supply your goods, one of the anticipation is that you get paid on time, and when that delays, it also builds into your cost. So all that put together, including one of the last things I forgot to mention is harassment or the regulatory overreach also by regulatory bodies, which contributes to that cost disadvantage. So all of that put together puts it at about 12.3% cost disadvantage. So how do we deal with this? It means addressing those different issues at the different levels we've talked about. So for competitiveness at inbound level is ensuring that we are able to bring in our raw materials competitively to the factory. So addressing all the costs I spoke about that affect the cost of raw material. The Common External Tariff Review ongoing at EAC will be able to at least create some order, but we still need to reduce the cost of transport and logistics and bring it down to a level that is competitive. Then at the factory level, we need to look at improving our productivity. We need to look at continuously improving the cost of power, quality and reliability of the same, and ensuring that all the factory costs are at a lower level. Then outbound county fees and charges, I think that's a conversation we've had over the years. The fact that we need to harmonize how goods move across the country and how we support businesses at county level. We also need to deal with the issue of delayed payments, whether it is payments to suppliers, VAT refunds, the billions of shillings owed to business is actually having an impact on the competitiveness of these businesses. And lastly, the issue of regulatory overreach and harassment by different regulatory bodies also needs to be looked into.
Very salient points you've raised there, Phyllis. And what's the legal scope, especially when it comes to payment to companies that have already supplied a service? What is CAM thinking around this? Especially, there's a lot of violation around that aspect. Is there legal headroom for us perhaps to work out a solution, especially for the manufacturers?
Delayed payments are a big problem, and the delay occurs when county governments or national government is not paying suppliers, then the suppliers or businesses in turn don't pay each other, so it becomes a vicious cycle. One of the things we are proposing from a policy and legislative angle is, first of all, to have a prompt payment legislation, and I think there's one that has been introduced to the Senate. This would cap the number of days, maybe to about 90 days, wherein you have to pay for any goods or services that have been supplied to you. A similar legislation exists in France, and I think theirs is about 60 days. So the culture of payment ensures that you're able to circulate money and goods much faster within the economy.
So what are the teething problems as to why people are not being paid on time? Is it's just a question of people want kickbacks, or it's just the liquidity?
I think it's a mix of issues. The liquidity is one of the challenges, because one of the biggest buyers of goods and services is government. And I think at the moment we all know that government is cash strapped. And that lack of liquidity has affected the ability for them to pay their suppliers. And in turn, they are not able to pay other suppliers. So that's part of the problem. But there's also the part where it's really just bad manners on the part of Kenyans sometimes not paying each other on time. And maybe a stick approach would assist in ensuring that there's a legislation that ensures that payments are made in time. So for both public sector and private sector, a prompt payment legislation would address the issue of payment.
Interesting.
Yes.
And I would not really want to chance, because we have you with us this afternoon, the issue of power costs. We are seeing a couple of major industries have shifted camp and gone to Ethiopia. Others are looking at Egypt. And how is this affecting us, especially now that we are looking at jobs, we are looking at opportunities for tax collection. At the same time, we want an economy to industrialize and hit the figures that you talked about.
Yes. Broadly, the conversation on power, I think, has been a conversation since the current president came into leadership. And at that point, we were at about 1,600 megawatts as a country, and there was a commitment to grow the grid. We've now gotten to about 2,800 megawatts, and our grid is primarily renewable energy or green energy, which is very positive. And the cost of power did move from about 21 to 16 US cents per kilowatt hour over the last maybe 6 to 7 years. The commitment was to see that cost at a single digit, because for us to be able to be more competitive in the region, it's important that the power cost does come down. So the conversations on power cost are ongoing. We've seen 2 initiatives come into place to try and address the issue of cost, because it's become evident that because of the amount of power on the grid and the realities in the country, it's not possible to have an overall drop. So a time of use tariff was introduced for manufacturing production at the night time. So some manufacturers have taken advantage of the time of use tariff, about 1,412 companies within the 1-year period it was in place. And then we've had also the rebate, the 30% rebate introduced on energy consumption when you're filing your tax returns. And that has just gone through the finance bill in June. So we are waiting now to see what the outcome will be. But in terms of implementation, we've sat down and settled on the modalities. For the long term, we do need the power to come down, especially for high energy consumers. Those would be people in the steel industry or metal and allied industry, building, mining and construction, the cement sector, specifically glass manufacturers. For those who consume high amounts of power, we're engaging government on a more short-term roadmap towards this. We've also heard recently from the Ministry of Energy that they are looking at a 220 kV power line that would be able to, at least for those huge power consumers, reduce it, hopefully to about 10 or a single digit. So we are keen to see that being implemented, because currently we have about 132 kV as the biggest. So with that larger 220, it's possible to bring it down. So I think a holistic conversation, a clear roadmap so that industries are able to plan would be necessary.
Interesting. And Phyllis, I would be at pains to explain why I did not ask this question as we wrap up our conversation. It's mainly around the plastic manufacturers. We did have a ban on plastics in the country. At the same time, CAM is also rooting for a plastic action plan. Perhaps would you share more details in this?
Yes. Manufacturers are very keen about the competitive and sustainable growth of the manufacturing sector. So sustainability is at the heart of what we are doing. And as you mentioned, the Ministry of Environment and Forestry has also been keen to look at how we can have a clean and healthy environment and reduce and manage our waste better. So out of that Kenya Association of Manufacturers, we have a framework of cooperation with the Ministry of Environment and Forestry, where we are looking at our plastic bottle waste management. But we thought it would be important to have a more holistic roadmap that looks at all the plastic waste in the country and sees how we can move towards a circular economy. Today, as we speak, we recycle about 6% of waste in our country. Other countries like Denmark, Germany, recycle over 50% of their waste. And there's opportunity for us to see how we can move towards a circular economy. So what the Kenya Plastics Action Plan is doing is it's brought together different stakeholders, a multi-stakeholder approach, so that we develop a roadmap towards a circular economy. And it will be launched on the 4th of December, this week on Wednesday. And we'll be happy to share more details on the thoughts within the Kenya Plastics Action Plan.
Interesting. We certainly do look forward to that. And yes, we've been speaking there to Phyllis Wakiaga, the Chief Executive Officer at Kenya Association of Manufacturers, just giving us some interesting insights into the state of manufacturing in the country, and of course a lot to be expected when it comes to addressing the pertinent issues around cost of power as well as delayed payments. Well,